Classmates, class is in session. Today we are learning about the input component. The input component is a single-line input box component. Almost all forms rely on the input component. A form can have no radio components or checkbox components, but it's unlikely to have no input component. The input component is the most frequently used component in forms. Common business scenarios include entering usernames and passwords during login, and entering various information during registration. Whenever information needs to be entered, the first choice is the input component. First, let's look at its attributes. The attributes of the input component include value, which is the initial content of the input box. And this is the most important attribute. Type indicates the type of the input component. There are many types of input components, such as text input boxes, number input boxes, and ID card input boxes, and so on. Password attribute indicates whether it is a password type. If password is true, it means the entered content is a password. The symbol displayed in the input box is the dot symbol, and it does not display the input content. Placeholder attribute represents the placeholder when the input box is empty. Placeholder style attribute represents the style of the placeholder. Disabled attribute indicates whether the input box is disabled. Max length attribute indicates the maximum length. There is also the confirm type attribute, which represents the text on the button at the bottom right corner of the screen keyboard, and only works when the type attribute value is text. Everyone, pay attention. By default, the text on the bottom right corner button of the screen keyboard is done. In many programs, if you need to enter information, a screen keyboard will pop up below. Confirm type refers to the text on the bottom right corner button of the screen keyboard. Confirm holder indicates whether the screen keyboard will retract after clicking the bottom right corner button. Now let's talk about the handling attributes of events such as @input, @blur, @confirm. @input means an event triggered when keyboard input occurs. It triggers every time a character is input, so the input event is triggered very frequently. You can get the input content from event detail value. @blur indicates an event triggered when the input box loses focus. This means it won't trigger when characters are input, only when the focus leaves the input box. You can also get the input content from event detail value. @confirm is triggered when the bottom right corner button of the screen keyboard is clicked. The input content is also obtained from event detail value. Valid values for the type attribute include text for a normal text input box, number for a numeric input box. In this case, only numeric keys appear on the screen keyboard. ID card for entering an ID card number. Tel for entering a phone number, and so on. Let's look at an example below. The focus attribute indicates whether automatic focus acquisition is enabled. Because this focus attribute is true, it automatically acquires focus. Take a look at the second input box. The bottom right corner button of the screen keyboard is set to Search. With that, confirm TP-Tribute set to Search. It won't show any effect here, nor will it pop up a screen keyboard, because we are running this in a built-in browser. If debugging in a real phone, a screen keyboard will pop up here, and the search button will appear on the bottom right corner of the keyboard. Next, let's see how to control the maximum input length. Set that max length attribute to 10. After entering 10 characters, you can't continue entering. How do we get the input characters in real time? Through handling the input event, you can get the input characters in real time. See, we are now getting the input characters in real time. Why does it happen like this? Because every time a character is entered in the input box, the input event is triggered. The method handling the input event is onChar_input. In the onChar_input method, execute this input value 等于 event.detail.value. This means that every time a character is entered into the input box, the input event is triggered, changing the value of the input value variable. And where is the input value variable finally bound to? It's bound right here. So every time a character is entered or deleted, this area will display the characters entered in real time. If you only need to get the content after the input component is finished, you generally use that blur event. For example, change this input event to blur. See, the content of the input box has changed, but the text bound to input value doesn't change in real time. However, when the focus leaves this input box, the text content here will also change. That means when the input component loses focus, the text content above will change. See, this is not real-time updating. If you want to get the input content in real time, use that input event. The input event is used relatively infrequently. In general, that blur event is more commonly used, because that input event triggers too frequently. Next, let's look at how to control the input data. This input component is bidirectionally bound to that changeValue variable. When characters are entered into the input component, the input event is triggered, and the replaceInput method is executed. Let's see what that replaceInput method does. It assigns the input content to that value variable. If that value variable is the string 11, the changeValue variable will change to 2, and the content in the input box above will also change to 2. Look, now it's fine to enter other data. But if you start by entering 2 consecutive 1 second, you'll see the input box data change to 2. This processing is done in the replace input method. The input box is bidirectionally bound to the change value variable. As long as input occurs here and the content changes, the value of the change value variable will also change. You can also bind the change value variable unidirectionally after this text. Look, this content will also change accordingly. Note that this input box is bound bidirectionally. So entering data here will change the text content above. If it were unidirectional, it wouldn't. This is the input component that controls input. And we can also control the screen keyboard. The method for handling the input event is the hide keyboard method. It hides the screen keyboard when entering 123. First, check if the input content is 123. If it is, call the UniHide Keyboard API to hide the keyboard. But it can't be demonstrated in a built-in browser, because the screen keyboard won't pop up right now. Then look at the numeric input box. If only numbers are entered, set the TipAttribute to number. Now, entering the input box, a numeric keyboard will pop up, and you can only enter numbers. No screen keyboard has popped up now, but on a phone, a numeric screen keyboard would pop up. This one is an input component for entering passwords. The password attribute is true. When entering characters, the entered characters won't appear on the page. The symbol displayed in the input box is the dot symbol. Let's look at the input component with decimals. The TipAttribute value is digit, allowing input of numbers and decimal points. You can't enter other characters, only numbers and decimal points. This one is an input component for entering an ID card number. The TipAttribute value is ID card. You can enter an ID card number. This indicates controlling the color of the placeholder. See, the placeholder color is red. It uses the placeholder's delete attribute. That's all for today's discussion on the input component. The most important attribute is the value attribute. In the input component, data binding is often used. It can be bound unidirectionally or bidirectionally. From a business perspective, the input component is mainly responsible for entering information. How do you get the input content? Through event detail value, you can obtain it. The input component is a crucial cornerstone of form components. Familiarizing yourself with the attributes and usage of the input component is indispensable for building high quality, high performance, and user-friendly pages. So, everyone must study the input component seriously. That concludes today's class. Thank you all.